You know, I was thinking, I think this is my sixth Spotlight. I was a customer and then an advisor, and then they poached me and brought me over, and it's been a great 6 years. One of the most important things I think we can do is listen to the voice of the customer, but especially the executive customer, the executive sponsor, because even when you build world-class capabilities, before that, it often takes strategy and vision and just pure leadership to help justify and really amplify the value that all that brings. And so I'm joined here by two great gentlemen, one podcast guest, and I'll have them introduce themselves here in a second, but we're going to ask them a series of questions in the form of really virtual mentorship. So thanks to everyone in the room and online, and thanks for being a part of this community. So first off, do us a favor. Michael, introduce yourself a little bit. Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, Michael Meese, as said, I lead security for the University of Kansas Health System, so security, identity, GRC, and disaster recovery. I spent about 2 years at H&R Block before that, where I rebuilt their GRC program around risk quantification, and then I spent about 15 years before that in the federal IT and consulting space for a variety of different federal agencies. I kind of grew up in the incident response space, so it always has a place near and dear to my heart, even though I'm much more removed from it now than I used to be, obviously.
And before that, too?
And before that, I was in the Army, in the Signal Corps, 25 uniform for any of my fellow veterans out there. Really great experience and kind of got my professional career started.
Thank you. And Jonathan?
I'm Jonathan Kennedy, CISO of Incom Payments. I also grew up in the military in the Signal Corps, but the Marine Corps for me. Moved over to Cyber Command after that, and in the private sector, I've been in fintech since I joined. And my current responsibilities are typical CISO things, handling security operations, all the risk ratings, and keeping us all together.
Not a planned question, but who has the better Signal Corps?
We all know.
Thank you. Jonathan, I'll stay with you. Building capabilities, I think, is important, and even beyond that, I think it's important for teams to be able to articulate kind of why it's important, why it's special. That involves justification, but it's also reflecting on what you've done as part of your strategy to then be able to articulate that to others that give you money and raises and bonuses and things like that. So over the last year or so, what's probably your favorite defensive analytic or response capability that you've been able to add to the program and kind of get credit for?
Yeah, absolutely. So insider threat has been a huge topic across the industry, and I think people have the wrong perception of what it really is. So your insider threats don't always know they're threats, right? So there are people inside your company that could be malicious, but some are just doing things they believe is part of their daily duties that introduces risks that you don't want to in your environment. So for those insiders, we built a lot of automation and integrations around our ServiceNow infrastructure to see, hey, was this firewall actually supposed to be changed? Was there a change ticket associated with it, and so on. So while all your analysts and your security teams are looking at the outside perimeter trying to make sure that everything's good, you just want to make sure someone didn't open up the back door and now you didn't know that risk was there beforehand. Now, that's something that we've been easily to sell, as to your point, for raises, bonuses, and doing our risk ratings and things like that.
Right.
But the thing I'm personally most proud of is we've done a lot of work in automation. So a lot of repeat like incidents and things like that we needed to get out of the analyst's basket, so they're not just like ticket farmers saying, yes, I've seen this before, yes, I've seen this before. So phishing was one example, right? Same reports, if there's 500 of them, then they're automatically closed. And because of these automations and not holding our analysts to be ticket farmers, I haven't had anyone quit due to burnout. So that's one of our proudest accomplishments.
And we'll hit more on that here in a second, but that's incredibly important. How do you leverage doing a program right, utilizing automation, aligning with the right organizations to help even with retention of staff and then tracking that, but we'll get to more of that. I don't want to ruin all of it just yet. Anything you'd add to that topic?
Yeah, so we very much focused on identities over the past year, specifically privileged identities. We've seen a variety of threat actors that are very focused on gaining domain admin in order to own your entire environment. And so that's really where we spent a lot of time focusing around not just who has explicit domain admin privileges, but what are different paths towards achieving domain admin from an adversarial perspective. And when we first started down this path, it was kind of terrifying. There were thousands of them when we started looking into it, and it kind of takes your breath away. And over the past year, we've actually reduced those by over 95% to where now we know that those potential paths toward domain admin are the ones that have legitimate business cases built around them. And it's also allowed us to enable or enhance our monitoring, because now we know that with that kind of smaller sample size of paths that are legitimate, we can then focus our detection and anomaly detection around what is normal behavior for that type of use case, what is normal for that individual, that identity, that entity, et cetera, to be able to better react and contain those types of threats when they do occur.
When you head down this journey, thank you, it's amazing how much trash collection you have to do on the path of learning your environment, right? You apply analytics. I remember this as a customer, where a lot of what you find early days is sort of well-meaning but bad IT, or sort of loose definition of control. But before that, before you had a platform to help with that, at least I was relatively ignorant to a lot of that that's occurring, which then slowed me down a bit and being able to find the bad. So would you say that's often the first step, is sort of this sort of hygienic cleaning of things before you end up, dealing with adversaries, as sort of the cleanup? Jonathan, would you say there's a big curve on that on your maturity journey?
No, definitely. And just kind of tacking on to the identity piece, right? Basically, what we were doing for several years before the identity is the new perimeter phrase came out, we were treating everyone the same. And then once we realized all these like cloud-connected tools and resources and everything, you can't treat everyone the same. We actually treat identities as vulnerabilities, right? So we actually rate the identity, the job function, what they have access to, do they have multiple areas of access, and that goes into our risk rating and our hygiene cleanup as we assign different controls for these identities. So if the CEO is just sending emails all day and taking Teams messages, no, implications with that, he doesn't need access to databases, right? He doesn't need access to the internal SharePoints of the development teams. Now, if a lady has multiple layers of access into all the databases, she needs more protection than the CEO does, needs a worse user experience, if you will, more MFA and things like that.
I absolutely love that nomenclature. I've actually never heard that reference before, but identity as a vulnerability, which is tied into credential, which leads us to our next question. So thanks for that tee up there. I appreciate that. So I don't think anyone in this room, I don't think it's new to anyone with us or online, that credential is sort of the tie that binds us in terms of bad incidents and breaches. It's either the initial access that's been purchased through like an initial access broker, or it's social engineering, where then credentials are made or modified or given to a new identity, or part of a larger attack cycle where they're an insider, there's credentials that are harvested to sort of walk you through the MITRE framework, if you will, along the way to their success. So if you were giving advice to a new security director, or maybe an organization that wasn't as mature, how do you tee that up and explain sort of the value or the risk of credential in that, and what are the kind of capabilities that you recommend for that? So maybe Michael, if you want to lead on that.
Yeah, I always tell everyone to start by understanding identity. It's honestly something that security people don't understand well inherently. Because when you're talking about credentials, it's obviously a subset of identity and access management. And in order to truly protect credentials, you have to first understand how the identity is supposed to work. And that's not just from a security perspective. You have to first start by understanding the user experience, which you talked a bit about, is what is a normal day in the life for that person, whether it's a CEO or, in my case, a nurse or a doctor. You have to understand what their workflows are, because you could put all the coolest security controls around an identity or a credential, and none of them will matter if you are breaking someone's job. They will either circumvent the controls or they will complain loud enough that you end up having to remove them anyway. And so we need to approach identity and credentials from a user experience perspective before we even think about security, is understand the user workflow and understand where we're introducing friction in the form of security controls. And then the second piece of it is understand your identity architecture and then how it can be abused. Again, we tend to focus a lot on controls instead of abuse or misuse of our identity architecture. And so oftentimes we put in a bunch of controls that end up not actually meaning anything in a real adversary environment. For example, I met a CISO a couple of months ago who was, he was the CISO at a large organization, one of the first ones that got hit by Lapsus. And they had MFA everywhere. They had a lot of really good identity controls, and Lapsus still breached them entirely through identity-based attacks. And it was because their session tokens were 7 days long, and so they were able to go buy a compromised session token and bypass all of their controls once they had that. And then, hard-coded credential in GitHub, and next thing you know, they own the whole environment. And so if you're not looking at identity from an adversarial perspective and you're just looking at controls, you're running a significant risk of the kind of whole house of cards collapsing pretty quickly.
Absolutely. Jonathan, anything to add to that?
I mean, like, I would echo everything you said. It's entirely accurate. Just to tack on a little bit of something, 5, 6 years ago, I thought the scariest thing that was ever going to happen in security was the login with Facebook, login with Google, and login with Apple, right? For third-party products, because you have no control over that. And obviously social media is not protected as much as, say, like a fintech would be. However, to your point, just baselining the actual user activity is incredibly important, because if you start getting alerts, hey, this person's never logged into this environment before, they're logging in, from Germany at 2 a.m. East Coast into this particular section that they have no job function into, there's obviously some room for improvement, or you have an actual attack going on. So just the baselining and then adjusting to that as well.
I wouldn't want to have to run a analytic or defensive or response capability without being able to tell that simple piece of information to say, does Steve typically do this? And one of the first questions you'll ask when you're on even an outage call, general IT, is this normal? We start looking at logs in more detail. I see error message. Is this normal? Being able to answer that very complex thing quickly and cheaply is so important. It really gives benefit to the defender, which in many cases only has about an hour and a half before you have breakout time from one infected system or credential or identity to two or more, right? So you need time on your side. So I want to switch gears a little bit. We've talked a little bit about AI this morning. But I think for some it can be a little complex or maybe even dangerous to select. So as you navigate that, what advice do you have of sort of evaluating that? If you were being a virtual mentor, which I'm big on, or in person, how do you help navigate that? How do you help the individual navigate the security leader to identify, sort of what are the right capabilities that maybe go along, or what are the ones that may just be sort of smoke and mirrors? Jonathan?
Yeah, so I guess my first piece of advice would be, if you are evaluating a particular type of technology, don't look at the buzzwords, right? Have them actually break down the fundamental science for it. Like it was mentioned today, like AI is not new. It's only the hype now because of like ChatGPT and the natural language processing models. We got immediate gratification from a tool that was calling itself AI, right? You put in an answer and then boom, like you got what you want. The back end has always been there with some AI technologies. Now, and some companies are still running those back ends, and that's the most important part of the security detection tools, right? Yeah, it's not gonna, like greet you in the morning and show you everything that you need to do immediately, but we are getting there, right? But I would just say, to understand the back end technology, ask for the white papers. If the account teams you're working with need to pull in someone else who's actually like the product manager, like, people have access to these resources, right? And I just encourage people to get into the scientists and the engineers of the products. And if the end state of what it's trying to accomplish is going to be a force multiplier for you in your response programs, then that's the kind of product I would go for. But if it's just all smoke, or not smoke and mirrors, but if it's just all like fancy lights, then you really don't need it.
Your thoughts?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost has nothing to do with AI at all. It's to first understand the problem you're trying to solve. And that's universal for whatever technology you're trying to implement. The last thing we need is another solution in search of a problem, like metaverse and the blockchain come to mind, that we're going to solve everything 3 years ago. But so first, deeply understand what problem you're actually trying to solve before you even ask where AI fits in or how it's going to help be part of that solution is really deeply understand the problem. And then the next part is exactly what you're talking about, is not all AI is created the same. We kind of use it as this blanket term for a few different types of technology. And you really need to understand how it works, how it scales, what data it was trained on, how it's going to learn. You also need transparency into how it's making decisions, because one of the huge pieces of AI is we need to be able to build confidence in its ability to make decisions on our behalf, and the only way to do that is to have transparency into how it's making those decisions, enough that we feel comfortable offloading those to an AI system. And so once you kind of have all of those, then I think the next piece of it, which we talked about a bit during the product meeting, is the integration of it. Is AI in a vacuum is not going to be super helpful. You'll never realize the whole value out of it. And so finding out where it integrates into the rest of your technology stack, whether that's incoming signals from data across your environment, or then connection to action platforms once you do make a decision to be able to act on those insights. That's the only way that we're really going to realize the value out of these platforms. And so it's important that we understand that kind of front to back before we start running down the implementation path.
I can tell you that if you have a big enough problem or failure, you will learn very quickly the types of questions you should ask. And so being a part of incident response and doing breach response, it becomes very clear the kind of things you need. And I can tell as a former customer that I didn't really care how it was solved. You talk on the topic of AI or ML, I was like, just solve it. And I think that's the thing to remember, like understand the problems you're having, understand, in my case, show me lateral movement, help build me timelines like I was previously hiring expensive consultants to build, right? And help me understand a credential shift and understand also what's normal. And those have stayed true the last 8 years for me, or 8.5. And so what problem are you trying to solve? And then what's the best engine to sort of give that magnification? One more question. So in running these programs, showing value is incredibly important. Some people will say they try to be instead of a cost center, they try to be a profit center. Some take that route. Others just focus on showing value. How do you show value in your program? And maybe as a secondary question, is there a metric that you use that you prefer, or a sort of a storyboard that you use? Maybe start with you.
Yeah, I'm glad that you didn't immediately equate value to money, right? Because it's very hard for a security department to say, I saved us X amount of dollars, right? Because unless you can actually predict the future and see where that attack chain would have gone to, you can't accurately display a dollar amount. So the way that we deliver value is I work with my vendors, my team, and my engineers with a very simple question, and it's so what? Right? So we put in a new technology, we put up a new wall, we see attacks, so what happened, right? Like how do we really show that this product is doing what it intended to do? We bought a shiny thing over here, it added $1 million to our budget, but it hasn't done anything in a year, right? So we get rid of it, right? And so looping in threat intelligence, the real world attacks, I don't really like the FUD thing, like the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But if you make it relatable to your industry or to your direct company, then that actually does show value, right? There was a incident in Florida where a water servicing plant was hit by an attack. They got ransomware, and it was a big deal. Well, how's that related to a payments processing company? Well, we used the same version as TeamViewer that they did, right? So then we just say, hey, we need to upgrade this and let's move forward, and that little dollar amount that you could equate to it, that's how we're saving money here. And just the ability to show the board or even your leaders, that the theoretical components of these attacks are very real, and we're stopping them exactly where we want to, and then we still have the defensive depth that we need to carry on with confidence. And it's that confidence that is the value.
You also had, I want to remind you, in an earlier conversation, you had a really good metric that was involving staff retention. That the benefit of having the right kind of automation, bringing time to value to staff, but also the retention of staff, which is difficult often in the cyberspace. You had a measure for that. Tell us.
Yeah, so all of our analysts who are at the tier 3 level now have been promoted internally, which is I'm very proud of. And to bring in a tier 3 analyst at whatever the dollar market is for your particular part of the world or country, it's still going to take them a year or two to get in place, right? Like to fully understand the organization. But when they grow internally, you're automatically on day 0 get that value from that employee because they grew up in within the organization. So just ensuring that mental health capability and keeping the team aligned and wanting to work together is great.
Tracking that turnover and getting rid of the repeat tickets and things that you have, and getting them up to speed and being able to give answers quickly. How would you approach this? Do you have another point of this, of just the value discussion?
Yeah, I think it's very similar to what he's talking about, is really understanding what the organization is trying to deliver from a value perspective, and then it usually becomes around protecting that value. So in a healthcare organization, we are laser focused on quality of care and patient care. It's the single metric that we judge the entire organization's performance off of. We don't take care of patients in the security world, and we never will, but we do enable patient care to occur. And how do we do that? Well, system availability is a huge component of that. And so we can kind of work backwards from there of what are we doing to enable system availability? How many outages or unplanned outages have we had in the past 6 months? Those types of things. So we're able to then relate our performance and our outcomes towards what the organization is driving towards as well. So it not only helps us to show our value, but then also helps to show us be a part of the organization as well.
Wonderful. I believe that concludes our panel. If I could have a round of applause for our wonderful guests. Thank you so much.